in our third lesson here on evolution versus creation, which one requires more faith? And we had opened up last week, and we talked about Darwin and the theory of evolution. And it's interesting how there's some aspects of Darwin's mindset that are okay, not many, very, very few. One of the key parts of Darwin's, because the book is called Evolution by Natural Selection. That's the name of the book. Natural selection, not a single problem with that. Natural selection is absolutely legit. It's a proven biological concept. We had talked about it last week. If you've got a herd of antelope and a lion's chasing after them, the slow one gets caught and eaten. The slow one doesn't reproduce. The fast one does. And over time, the antelopes get faster. That's natural selection, perfectly fine. No sweat. What that does is it changes the population distribution of the organisms. That population of antelopes that is being chased by lions tends to get faster. Just like our athletes tend to get better and better and better athletes as we have better and better and better training, same concept. It's a change in population distribution. What Darwin says, and here's where the problem is, is that what he says is that through natural selection, changes begin to happen in the organism, and with enough changes in the organism, it all of a sudden, boom, becomes a new species. And that's where evolution becomes crap. So, is there evidence for evolution? Well, let's walk through what they say. First of all, the fossil record. That's the big one. They always talk about the fossil record in terms of that's how we know what's going on. And keep in mind, again, let's sort of rewind again, mostly for our visitors that are here. The theory of evolution, and I would argue it is not so much a theory as a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a possible solution. A theory is a probable solution that has scientific evidence to back it up. And eventually that becomes, in science, with scientific method, it becomes what we call a law, where we have a process that occurs and is true everywhere in the universe all the time, no exceptions. The law of gravitation is a great example. Evolution is a theory. So supposedly there is scientific evidence to back up what we're seeing. And that's what we're going to sort of walk our way through here. So the fossil record, invertebrates, all right? If you go out and if you look in the ocean and we see snails and sponges, nautiloids. Nautiloids are a spiral shell, but they're an octopus-like creature that lives in a shell. Okay, nautiloids, starfish, sea urchins. We see those things in the ocean. Today? No. What they call the trilobite age. Again, and when I give ages and numbers and years, always keep in mind, I'm not going to every time say it, they say this is 500 million years ago. I'm not going to say that every time. I'm going to drop out that they say. It is understood that when I'm talking about these huge lengths of time, the implication to that phrase is according to mainstream science. So we'll keep that in mind. The trilobite age, supposedly 500 million years ago, so why does it look the same? Okay, so we don't have trilobites anymore. We've got horseshoe crabs that look pretty similar. There's changes, there's loss of some species, but why do some things evolve? Why do some organisms evolve and other organisms don't? Why are some organisms literally unchanged from 500 million, 800 million, a billion years ago, whatever they want to say, and yet other ones change. Oh, we're not apes anymore, we're human beings instead. There's no real good explanation for that. Oh, they were just perfect. Well, if they were perfect, if sponges were perfect, our entire universe would look like SpongeBob SquarePants. And that's what we would be. We would be these little walking sponges. Hey. No, it's not reality. Now, there are some organisms out there, the shark. The shark is an absolute perfect predatory machine, without a doubt. If you want to go by evolution and say, okay, so sharks evolved, and once they got to sharks, you can't get any better, so they stayed. All right, I'll go with that. But some of these other things that are out there, no. All right, are we looking at evolution, or are we looking at extinction? Are we looking at loss of species versus change of species? All right, it's a loss of complexity over time. Oh, remember that second law of thermodynamics? All right, going back to physics. All right, the first law of thermodynamics, energy can be created from one form to another. But the second law of thermodynamics says every time you convert energy from one form to another, you lose some. Systems tend toward more and more and more and more chaos, more and more disorder over time. But evolution turns that around and says, oh, well, organisms are getting more complex with time. No, that's not what's going on. We've got a loss of complexity with time, not a gain. Plants. Okay, so we got plants out there. That's really kind of cool. All of a sudden, in the dinosaur age, again, sort of rewinding that, every time I'm talking about that, this is that according to mainstream science, all right? Prior to the dinosaur age, all right, prior to the Cretaceous, we had things like ferns and those type of plants. And all of a sudden, in the dinosaur age, we've got flowering plants. Now, according to evolution, flowering plants are a more evolved, a more complex form of plant. I mean, a plant's a plant, but a more complex form of plant than ferns are, than mushrooms are, things like that. They all of a sudden appear, and yet those kind of flowering plants that we see back in the dinosaur age, 200, 300 million years ago, I'm getting by on caffeine, cough drops, and God. They're literally the same kind of types that we have today. Same issue with our organisms in the ocean, our invertebrate organisms in the ocean, we've got with plants. And they don't have a really good explanation for why that's happening. Why are there no real evolutionary changes in these plants from 3 or 4 or 500 million years ago? And yet other things do evolve. Again, no explanation for that one. Darwin called it an abominable mystery. The guy that came up with the idea said, yeah, okay, I can't explain this either, but we're just going to ignore that. That's a theme that you see throughout our discussion of evolution and the evidence that supposedly supports evolution. That's the theme that we see throughout it. It's if they can't explain it, they ignore it. Vertebrates, us. Vertebrates are things that have their skeletal structure inside versus invertebrates that have their skeletal structure outside. Insects, crabs, things like that, all right? Or things that don't have a skeletal structure. Vertebrates like us, we have ours in the inside. We go from fins to legs to wings. I love that one. So where are the missing links? Where are the steps in between? If this is supposed to be this long, gradual process, I remember It's been, ooh, boy, 25 years ago or more, because my older son was a real little guy. I had done a grant program with the National Science Foundation, had an opportunity to go out to California to the National Science Teacher Convention. It happened to be out in California that year. And I got a chance to go to a lecture by a gentleman by the name of Bob Bakker, B-A-K-K-E-R. Fascinating guy, amazing lecture. He's the guy, if you've ever seen the Jurassic Park movies, he's the guy that Alan Grant's character is modeled after. And he has the mindset, the theory that T-Rex didn't go extinct. T-Rex eventually evolved into a turkey. That dinosaurs, specifically the raptor type dinosaurs, the standing on two legs, big teeth, short little arms, that whole thing, all right, that those organisms eventually evolved into birds. And you look at skeletal structures and, oh, well, this particular part of the skeleton looks sort of like this particular part of the skeleton and all that good stuff. The problem is we don't see the transitions. That's the whole issue. We don't see the transitions. Archaeopteryx is the great example. And I think that's the reason why little kids love dinosaurs. Because little kids learn these crazy complex names and can say them. And adults are looking at them going, but little kids, I think it makes them seem smart to adults. Because I mean, so many little kids just love dinosaurs. But Archaeopteryx, it's the prime example of what this is supposed to be. It's supposedly one of the very first evolutionary steps from dinosaur to bird. Okay, you see a head that looks sort of like some of the carnivorous dinosaurs. It's got a tail like dinosaurs do, and yet it's got wings, it's got feathers. Is that a link, or is that just some other kind of organism? I mean, if somebody described to you an organism with a duck's bill, it has fur, it lives in water, it has claws that have poison in them, it lays eggs.
It sweats milk?
The duck-billed platypus. It's sort of like Archaeopteryx. It's this mishmash of things. I've always said that the platypus was God's example of his sense of humor, saying, let me throw together all this extra stuff and then throw it down in Australia, and let's see what they think about that thing when they find it. But it's sort of the same thing. Is a platypus an evolutionary link between something and a duck? It lays eggs, it's got a bill. No, it's not. It's a complete organism. It works. A platypus works perfectly well. Interestingly, they have found bird skeletons, bird fossils, in layers that are older than Archaeopteryx. But Archaeopteryx is supposed to be the evolutionary link thing. So you go from dinosaur to it's got wings sort of things, and then it gradually loses the tail, and it gets feathers, and you gradually have this process. But how do you have birds in an older layer than Archaeopteryx? The other thing that's really kind of funny about that one, this is this great example of this missing link. They only ever found one of them. There's only one of that particular fossil. Again, is this really a missing link, or is it an example of God's creation and this particular organism the way he put it together? What about the human record? Oh, there we go. Man from monkeys. Yep, okay. Neanderthal. There's some people I know that sort of look like Neanderthals. Neanderthal man, and it's this. You see the cartoon that's the fish becomes the lizard that walks on land and eventually becomes a human being and becomes man, and then usually the joke is then it adds something else that's like more highly evolved than man. It's like, what's the next more highly evolved form than man? Woman, or whatever, whatever it may be. The human record for evolution, Neanderthal, supposedly is the ancestor to modern man. Okay, that we are. From a biological standpoint, we are Homo sapiens. That is our classification as an organism. Cro-Magnon man is one step, by their mindset, one step below, and then Neanderthal. So Neanderthal is two steps back. And now when they look at Neanderthal, they find that really and truly it's no different than physical differences between Americans or people that have ancestry in America and people that have ancestry in Europe, or people that have ancestry in Asia, or people that have ancestry in Africa. Literally, the differences between Neanderthal and us, which is supposed to be two steps in the evolutionary record, is really no different than the distribution of human beings on the planet today. Piltdown Man. It was a hoax. A lot of these were, by the way. It was a hoax. A paleontologist took a human skull and an ape jaw, and now all of a sudden you've got this big brain with this big animal-like jaw. So this is that, remember we talked about those transition steps. That's what they're trying to put together or find, these transition steps from one organism to another, and they're saying Piltdown Man that's what that was. No, wrong. Java Man. Not a hoax, just bad science. They found a fragment of a human skull and a femur, a leg bone, from a giant extinct gibbon. A gibbon is a monkey, in a gravel pit. The one was way over there, and the other one was way over there, and they said these are part of the same organism. You laugh because you sort of have to. When you look at this stuff, you laugh because you have to. It's sad. Peking Man, they only found skulls, and all of them were smashed in the back. And the skulls were very, very monkey-like. That's interesting. So maybe they were just monkeys. Man's meal, not man. That these were organisms that people hunted and killed by smashing them in the back of the head, and what we found were a bunch of monkeys, not a bunch of men. All right? Nebraska Man. Getting an entire evolutionary being from a tooth. One tooth. Again, that's another sort of theme here, where you're taking parts of these organisms and sort of putting them together when you're only finding little tiny bits and pieces. What I kind of find funny too is as they've changed over the years. I remember as a kid seeing books about dinosaurs, and a lot of the dinosaurs were ones where they showed them walking sort of like alligators. This kind of thing, all right? Walking on all fours like that. And as they continued to do more research and things like that, and looking at it and looking at the bones and figuring out from the bones where the muscles attached and everything else, they figure out, no, they weren't this way, they were this way, upright. I always get the chuckle out of T-Rex and how they've changed T-Rex. You know why T-Rex has problem picking things up with their arms, right? Because they're all dead. But T-Rex, again, when I was a kid, all the things with T-Rex, or even the Brontosaurus, big long neck, big long tail. All right, T-Rex, same thing, big head, big tail. And all the presentations you ever saw about them were standing upright and walking and dragging their tails along the ground. And I never thought that made sense. And scientists and physicists have sort of looked at that and went, If you ever watch Jurassic Park, one of the things about that movie, in some of the aspects of it, very, very scientifically accurate in the behaviors of some of these animals. T-Rex, why did it have a big long tail? To balance that big head. So that way, when it's going after something, you've got that chase scene where it's chasing the Jeep, right? It's leaned over like this, big head sticking out that way, big tail sticking out that way to be able to balance it. T-Rex could run at 30 miles an hour. Whoa. Brontosaur, the Brontosaurus, the long-necked dinosaurs, right? Why did they have that big long tail? To balance out the big long neck. And, okay, big long neck. So they're using that to be able to eat trees up high. Cool. And then what would they do? And it's that one scene in the movie that it just always gets me. Spielberg just did such a fantastic job with that, where the Brontosaurus is coming up to the tree and it sits up on its hind legs and balances on its tail to be able to reach even higher up in the tree. And yet they changed, over time, they've changed their mindset about how these things are put together. In a lot of cases, it's because they're finding more information. And in a lot of cases, they're putting things together with like only one or two little pieces and realizing, well, maybe that's not exactly right. They developed for Nebraska Man, they came up with the entire organism from a tooth that was in the Scopes monkey trial. The Scopes trial was the one that basically led to forcing the teaching of evolution in schools. And it turned out to be the tooth of a pig. Wasn't a person, not a man, coming up with this entire organism just from that one thing. Nope. Australopithecus. Yeah, there we go. All right. That's this earliest, okay, Lucy. That's what they call her. All right. That's this earliest ancestor that they found, the Leakeys, husband and wife paleontologists, found in a valley in Africa. Okay. And this is supposed to be like one of the very earliest steps in this evolution of man. It's thought to be one of the very earliest fossils of man ever found. What's interesting is in that same area where they found Australopithecus, they found rhinos, they found skeletons of boa constrictors, they found hippos, but they didn't find any apes. Or did they? Is Australopithecus early man? Or is it an ape, which is the same kind of organisms that live in that area today? So, Neanderthals are just people. Piltdown man's a hoax. Nebraska man's a pig's tooth. Java man is just man and really crappy science. Peking man is monkeys, really crappy science. Australopithecus are apes. Man from ape? Don't think so. Don't think so. Oh, just a little trivia. The one dinosaur called the duckbill dinosaur, the hadrosaur, okay, stands upright, big, sort of almost a duckbill kind of thing. They call it the hadrosaur. Anybody know why they call it a hadrosaur? It's named after where they found it. Haddonfield. Like here in New Jersey, if you go in downtown Haddonfield, there's a giant statue of a hadrosaur in the middle of Haddonfield. If you go out 322, beyond Glassboro, I still call it Glassboro State, beyond Rowan, out that way, there's a dinosaur park. There's an area where they have dug up all kind of dinosaur bones and things like that. You can go there. From what I understand, the museum is absolutely amazing, and you can go and you can dig up fossils. It's really kind of cool. It's something I think I'd like to go to see just to see what it is. But some of these discoveries, these aren't just in all these far-flung areas of the world. The hadrosaur was discovered here in a bog, a farmer's field here in New Jersey. So we're going to start into this transition between the biology side and the physics side. It's 25 after 10. I'm going to start into this week. We're going to continue it next week. Here comes the hard science. We start getting out of the biology and start getting into I don't want to say the real science, but the physics. Because really, physics, and I've always told my students this, physics is the fundamental science. Every other science is built upon physics because every other science obeys the laws of physics. Chemistry works because of the laws of physics, the attraction and repulsion of positive and negative particles and things like that. Biology works because of the interactions of chemistry. So there is sort of a progression here. My degree in college was meteorology. I had to take 8 semesters of physics classes for meteorology because you're looking at the application of the laws of physics to a system in motion, which happens to be the Earth's atmosphere. So physics really, you have to go down, and this is where our evolutionists just trip and fall flat in their faces because they never have a good explanation. They can babble their way through the stuff we've already looked at and give you some really good mumbo jumbo to try to explain what's going on. But throw second law at them and they go, So, the second law, it's a little hard to read because it's a little bit small there. But degree of organization along the left-hand side and time along the bottom. And what evolution says is that by natural processes, we are going, where is it? I knew I was going to need this. There we go. Organization along this axis, time along this axis, and what evolution says is that over time, we are gradually increasing organization. Things are getting more and more and more complex over time. So that the universe is going closer and closer and closer to perfect organization. That's essentially what evolution says is happening. But that is 100% against the second law of thermodynamics. This is how biology works. We start with the primordial soup and just chemicals, and those chemicals become primitive organisms, and those organisms get more and more and more and more complex as we get up into people and further up. Doesn't work that way. That violates the second law of thermodynamics. It also violates common sense. In biology, there is a concept called irreducible complexity. We use the human eye as a great example. The human eye is a phenomenal example of irreducible complexity. How many people have some kind of vision problem? A lot of us do, okay? Whether it's because we wear glasses, you have things like macular degeneration and cataracts and all these different things that can happen. The eye is an absolutely amazingly complex biological organ that allows us to be able to see. It's connected to the brain, so eye all by itself is useless without the brain, but it's an example of irreducible complexity. According to evolution, you start with this really simple thing, and changes happen to make that simple thing better. So that better thing reproduces and the not so good thing doesn't, so things gradually improve. doesn't explain how an eyeball comes into existence. Because if you take, and the reason why I asked about anybody having vision issues, if you take any tiny little part of the system that is your eye and mess it up, what happens? It doesn't work. It's irreducible complexity. The eye is such a complex thing that just to assume that it came into existence by this process, this gradual process of things getting gradually more and more and more complex until we come to the human eye, or even more complex, the eye of like an eagle or something like that, that's even more complex than ours. What's interesting is, think about an octopus. If you were an evolutionary biologist and you were going to classify human beings versus octopi, where do you put them? Who's higher, us or an octopus? We're higher, right? Octopus are far more primitive organisms. They're invertebrates, all right? They can't like make tools and stuff like that, although they can. They're invertebrates. The eye of an octopus is at least as complex as our eye. Wait a second. So how do we have this really complex eyeball in an octopus that's supposedly this really primitive organism? Oh yeah, remember those things were around 500 billion years ago, 500 million years ago. Octopi were around. The concept of irreducible complexity sort of tosses everything right out the window. Because if this perfect system has one little thing that goes wrong with it, all of a sudden it doesn't work. Oh, you mean like the way the systems actually work? Creation, perfect organization. Again, same thing, degree of organization along the left, time along the bottom. And what is gradually happening to the earth? It's getting less and less and less and less complex. Things are breaking down. We're breaking down. That's reality. That's the second law. That's not evolution. That goes against evolution. And yet, that's the model that evolutionists want us to believe is going on. This one. This violates the second law of thermodynamics. Remember we talked about hypothesis, theory, law? Law applies all the time, everywhere, no exceptions, period, end of conversation. The second law of thermodynamics doesn't just apply to car engines and things like that. It applies to every system in the universe, including biological systems, that we tend toward more and more and more disorder. Do I have an amen to that one? I certainly feel it. That's the reality. That's biology by the creation model. And the second law of thermodynamics is obeyed. That's the creation model. Now, we're going to go onward and look a little bit more with evolution in terms of its timing, and then start looking at some other aspects with creation next week. But ultimately, and I'm going to just jump up for the sake of our visitors who probably won't be here next week, I'm going to jump up to my last slide. My normal class people, you don't see this. You see nothing. Which worldview is more consistent with the weight of evidence? The evolutionary worldview or the creation worldview? Which worldview requires more faith in an unknown or an unexplainable process? Which worldview is more self-consistent within its own body of evidence? As Fox News says, we report, you decide. I know which one, in my mind, is the one that is more consistent, that is more correct, that fits the evidence that we see. And it's certainly not evolution. It's certainly not evolution. It requires more faith to believe in evolution than it does to believe in creation. There's actually a book that I think it's called, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Being an atheist, it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian. It really does. So next week we are going to continue. We're going to be looking at the timing of evolution next week, because the whole thing with evolution, the whole issue with evolution is that by definition, evolution requires a long amount of time. By definition. These are very small, gradual changes that happen over a really long enough time. And the question is there enough time? So in other words, how old is the earth? That's next week. Okay, that's what we're going to look at next week. Evolutionists, by definition, are believers in the Big Bang. All right. What's interesting is that means they are believers in a creation. We've got to have a start point for this evolutionary process. Otherwise, I mean, it started somewhere. It started at some point, at a creation of some point. They say the universe came into existence 12 to 15 billion years ago, and the Earth formed 4.5 to 5 billion years ago. What we're going to be looking at next week is how legitimate is that? And more than anything else, the second piece of that, the age of the Earth. That's what we're going to be looking at next week. So we're going to wrap up our discussion of evolution next week. The following week is our sort of our open forum question and answer time. So that's where I put you on the spot. All right, I'm the one that's been up here all this time. I'm going to put you guys on the spot in that if you have any questions, if there's something that I mentioned that you weren't quite clear on or wanted a little bit better explanation or had a question about, okay, that's not next week, but the following week, okay? And then we'll be going on in the beginning of March, be going on into our next course, okay? So with that, let's close in prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for the day you've given to us. Thank you for getting me through this lesson with controlling my cough and being able to get through this lesson and my presentation today. I pray that it would stir hearts, that it would cause questions, that it would cause people to think about what the world says and what we say here in our belief and in our knowledge, in our assurance of the reality and the truth, that your word is true, that you are the creator of the universe, that you are over all, that you are controlling all, that you are just everything that's going on in the world goes through your hands, Lord. And we thank you for that. I thank you again for the class today, for the service coming up. Pray that you'll be with Pastor, be with the message, that it would come across clear and strong, and that souls would be saved. All these things we ask in your Son's name. Amen.